What is an Australian citizen? Like all of their other fellow Australians, this individual holds some of the greatest and most empowering freedoms in the world, thanks to the strength of the nation's rule of law and democracy, which includes checks and balances on those in power, to protect individuals' rights and liberties. As French political thinker Montesquieu said in 1748, constant experience shows us that every man invested with power is apt to abuse it, and carry his authority as far as it will go. Therefore, to stop those invested with power from abusing their power, checks and balances are put in place. So, what are checks and balances? Checks and balances are multiple mechanisms, often overlapping, that limit or stop one person or group of people from becoming too powerful and exceeding their specific powers. Central to checks and balances is the structural separation of powers. Power is divided between the three arms of government: the legislature, the parliament, executive, the government, and judiciary, the courts, with each arm having its own separate functions and responsibilities. This ensures important transparent checks can operate, and neither arm exceeds their specific powers nor becomes too powerful. Australia's separation of powers is outlined in the Australian Constitution, which stipulates how power is divided between the federal legislature, the federal executive, and the federal judiciary. The Australian Constitution was made by Australians and can only be changed by a referendum of Australians. This is an important check on power, as it is not easy to change the Constitution and requires the majority vote of all Australians. So, what are the roles and responsibilities of each of Australia's three arms of government? And what checks and balances do we have on each arm? Firstly, the federal legislature has the power to make laws in specific areas, and state legislatures have the power to make laws in others. It is made up of an assembly of elected representatives known as Parliament, who are elected in an open and free election by all Australians, where anyone is free to stand. In Australia, the bicameral system of federal legislature, one which has an upper and lower house of parliament, is a significant check on the power of the legislature. The important debate and scrutiny of bills within the party room from multiple political parties enables members of the legislature to express the views and concerns of who they represent. Parliamentary rules and procedures also provide checks on the legislature, such as multiple readings of speeches and the publication of all bills on the parliamentary website, in order to maintain transparency so that the law is knowable to the public. The legislature acts as a check on the judiciary and the executive, as it can pass laws which override judge-made law, also known as the common law. The federal executive has the power to propose and implement laws that have been debated and passed by the parliament. It is generally made up of individuals who represent the executive, including ministers and the government departments, agencies, and statutory bodies that they are responsible for. As the executive has the power to carry out and enforce the law, it has the greatest potential of all arms of government for corruption and for exceeding their power. Checks, therefore, must ensure the executive acts in accordance with the law and is responsible to Parliament for their actions. A significant check on the power of the executive is by judicial review. This means that the judiciary has the power to declare actions of the executive not in accordance with the law and unlawful. Another check on the power of the executive is scrutiny by the legislature and parliamentary committees, who have the power to ask the executive questions in Parliament and hold them accountable. The federal judiciary, which is comprised of judges and the courts, is one of the strongest checks on executive power. The judiciary interprets the law to determine if an individual or party, including those within the government, have acted lawfully. This includes the power to strike down laws made by the legislature that are deemed unconstitutional. The High Court of Australia is the powerful head of the judicial branch and has the power to overrule decisions of all lower courts. There is generally a right of appeal from any decision of a lower court, which is a very important check. For the judiciary to be able to provide justice and prevent excessive concentration of power, it must be independent of the legislature and executive. Australia's constitution limits the ability of the executive and legislature to influence the decisions of the judiciary by protecting its tenure and remuneration. This means that a judge cannot merely be sacked or have their pay reduced if they make a decision that those in power dislike. The judiciary is an important check, with the goal of all Australians being equal and accountable under the law, and no one is above the law, regardless of their status or rank, thereby providing a legal process for individuals, no matter their position, to challenge the decisions and actions of the legislature and executive. All of these checks and balances at the federal level are replicated generally at the state level, there being for each state and territory their own state legislature, state executive, and state courts. We, the everyday Australians, also play a role in the checks on the abuse of powers. It is up to us, the Australian public, and the Australian media, to use our political liberties to be active participants in our democracy, and to hold the government accountable at election time, and at other times through the media or via our correspondence with our local MPs, so that our individual rights and liberties continue to be protected. It is the reason we have peaceful elections, and it is part of our culture. We have a community responsibility to uphold it. The checks and balances we have discussed do not guarantee a fair and democratic society, but provide an important system to help us work towards one. With power comes responsibility, and the need for continual restraints and checks on power is essential.